rift between India and Canada?
It follows Ottawa's claims the Indian government was directly involved in the killing of a Sikh separatist on Canadian soil last June. New Delhi denies this, calling the allegations absurd. Both sides expelled each other's top diplomats yesterday, and there are now calls on Canada's end to impose sanctions on India, as well as a ban on a local Hindu nationalist group known as the RSS.
I don't want the Indian government, which is who the RSME has implicated in this, and the Modi government specifically, I don't want the Indian government or Modi to think they've got someone in Canada who's willing to look the other way to ignore what's going on.
All right, for more on the row, we are joined by Michael Kugelman. He's a director of South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Michael, good morning. I understand that you've compared a recent escalation of tensions between Canada and India to the dynamics of the Indo-Pakistan relationship. Could you elaborate, and how concerned are you about the ongoing situation?
Yeah, and it seems hard to believe to make that comparison because there was a time when India and Canada had a very strong partnership with a lot of trade, with a number of strategic convergences regarding Asia. But if you look at how the rhetoric has changed, and if you look at just how tense things are, and specifically if you look at what India is saying about Canada, India's government is now saying that Canada is sheltering and sponsoring anti-India terrorists. That is the exact accusation that it has leveled against Pakistan for many years. I don't want to overstate the comparison by any means, but it is notable that the allegations that India is making, that is directing at Canada, are the same allegations it's leveled at Pakistan for many years.
So Michael, what happens now? I mean, all reports indicate that neither India nor Canada is inclined to back down on these very serious allegations. So could Canada conceivably share more details of its investigation? Is that considered kosher in the world of international diplomacy?
I mean, it could happen. Already we've seen that play out. I mean, Canada has been carrying out this investigation of the assassination of the Sikh separatists last year. And it's in the course of that investigation, according to Canada, that it's come across all this new information reflected in this extraordinary statement that the Canadian police released on Monday, that laid out this idea that this allegation that India's diplomats, including the Indian High Commissioner in Canada, were part of this criminal racket, gathering intelligence and sharing it with thugs that then threatened and attacked Sikh activists in Canada. These are incredibly damaging allegations. One can understand why India reacted the way it did. But Canada has made a lot of allegations publicly, but it has not provided a lot of evidence to back them up. And Canada's government has said that it's not going to do that because it could undercut the integrity of its investigation. But the more allegations it puts out there in the public eye, the more pressure on Canada to come out with some very specific evidence. So we'll see how things play out in the coming days and weeks.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you believe that Ottawa misread the signals from New Delhi about its concern over pro-Khalistan elements in Canada, and this has happened for years. And I want to be careful about how I phrase it. So by extension, is it possible, that the Indian government is complicit at some level? Maybe it's basic knowledge of the activities and tacit approval, turning a blind eye, perhaps to more direct involvement in the activities that Canadian authorities, have listed, which include, some serious ones like homicides, extortion, and violent acts.
Right. So again, the Canadian government has claimed that very senior Indian diplomats, including its High Commissioner in Canada, were involved in this engagement, so to speak, this plan to gather intelligence about Sikh separatists and pass it on to people, including those in criminal gangs, that then made threats and in some cases carried out attacks against Sikh separatists. But one of the big questions about what type of role the Indian government at the highest levels back in New Delhi has had. And again, the Canadian perspective is that a senior Indian official, as well as a senior intelligence official, had been overseeing this entire process from New Delhi. Now, again, Canada has not provided any evidence, at least not publicly, to back that up. India, of course, has rejected this. But yes, the allegations are very serious because they do accuse India's government on very high levels being directly involved to some extent in these activities playing out in Canada for a number of years.
So, Michael, could you talk to us about why the Modi government is concerned about the Khalistan movement? Because analysts and political leaders are saying that there are little support in Punjab for a secessionist cause that peaked decades ago, and many locals of Punjab don't even know about the Khalistan Tiger Force or even Nijjar.
Right. I mean, it's interesting in that India has been playing up a threat that one could argue does not really exist, in the sense that, as you say, this Khalistan movement doesn't have much to it in India. And you do have these Khalistan supporters, but they're hundreds of miles away. They're mostly in the West. They're in Canada, the US, the UK, Australia. But I think that India remembers how things used to be in the 1970s and 80s, when there was a full-fledged insurgency, a violent insurgency being waged by Khalistanis. And I think that India's concern, or at least what it projects as its concern, is that it fears that these groups, or these individuals, are making a comeback from their safe haven, so to speak, according to the Indian perspective, in Canada and several other Western countries, where no one's going to give them a hard time, no one's going to bother them. And India is claiming that this could, in due course, pose another major violent threat to India. And this is part of the problem here, the tensions with India and Canada. Canada looks at this very differently. It doesn't believe that it's sheltering anti-India extremists. It believes that these are activists. These are Sikh separatists who are activists, and what they do and say is protected by freedom of speech laws in Canada. But that fundamental disconnect in terms of who these people are and what threat they pose, this is at the core of this deep crisis between Canada and India.
And Michael, and some analysts are saying the prime ministers of India and Canada could both benefit politically from this current diplomatic rift. What's your assessment? Would you agree that is there a potential impact of the standoff on both Modi's and Trudeau's domestic political landscape?
Yeah, I think that India's Modi gains from this crisis because his government has been rejecting vociferously these allegations. So it essentially looks like India is defending its honor and its integrity by pushing back against these outrageous allegations. And for those supporters of India that might think that the allegations are true and that India was involved in these violent activities in Canada, the view there is that this is India doing the right thing to go after violent threats. Now, in terms of the Canada case, it is true that Trudeau depends on the support of Sikh political parties. You do have a large Sikh community in Canada. It's in fact the largest outside of India, and it is politically influential. And so I think there is something to say for the fact that the way in which Trudeau and his government address these issues with Sikh separatists and Khalistanis may be done in a way to take into account the views and the broader sentiments of the Sikh community, most of whom, by the way, does not support at all the Khalistan movement, and particularly the use of violence in that regard. Now, the Indian government's position is that the main reason why Trudeau is doing nothing to address this anti-India threat is that he's doing vote bank politics, that he's trying to appease Sikhs. I think that's taking things too far, but there are clearly domestic factors at play in both countries that I think drive both leaders' behavior and actions, and also, the fact that these two prime ministers both benefit from this crisis. Particularly Trudeau, who, unlike Modi, is experiencing a lot of challenges domestically, politically. Popularity is not very high for Trudeau compared to Modi, so one could argue that there might be some opportunities here for him to be boosted. And I should also say that the opposition in Canada has rallied around the Trudeau government over the last few days after it's laid out these latest serious allegations against India. And I think that's important for Trudeau as well.
Understood. Michael, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Michael Kugelman is director at the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center.